I do. I was 17, senior in high school, sitting in history class, middle high school. An administrative lady kind of came bursting in a little bit and said that they said a small aircraft had hit the towers. And we had enough time. We had turned the TV on just in time to see the second tower get smacked.
I do. I was sitting in homeroom my 10th grade year in high school. Um, Normal little TV in the corner, and teacher popped it on. I don't remember exactly how long after we watched the second plane hit, and then they shut the whole thing off. And I think within probably 5 minutes, my mom had called the principal and picked me up from school. Yeah, as weird as that was.
9/11, I was attending college at Texas A&M University. I was actually at the Corps Cadets ROTC program. I remember the upperclassman across the hall pulling me and my roommate out. He came in there frantically saying, "Hey, an airplane just hit the World Trade Center." It didn't really register that whole process as far as the visual until we got to the TV, and we were all watching live when that second plane hit that second tower. It was quiet. Like no one could say anything for, it seemed like forever. I guess the biggest response internally was watching them crumble. Just thinking about all those people that were stuck in that building. And then the second tower crumbled. Yeah, we probably watched. It was a tiny ass little screen TV that we probably watched that for hours after that. It's one of those days in time that I definitely will never forget.
Yeah, I think I was motivated to join the military before 9/11 happened, just from growing up around the area and knowing the people that were around here. But it definitely gave a whole nother level and meaning after 9/11 happened, um, and joining the military and the cause and kind of the trauma that it did with the country. You know, even though I was 17, it kind of gave no one fucks with America and a sense of vengeance and wanting to make things right.
I already knew I was going to the military. 9/11 was definitely a cherry on top because it made you feel like you were actually going to make a difference no matter what. Like right when those towers fell, anybody who ever wanted to be a Marine, join the Air Force or whatever, it was like, if you're going to do it, right now is the time. I mean, so many kids just blew off college and, quit, playing collegiate sports and everything else. It's like, if you're going to join the military, right now is the moment. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. It definitely changed the trajectory of my career path, my life. I was attending college at the time for pediatrics. I was definitely supportive of our military, knowing that they were going to handle their business, even though I had no interest in ever joining the military before 9/11. But as everything unfolded on the news, all more information came that was a terrorist attack. I mean, I felt like I took it personally, like they attacked my home. And as time progressed, watching the initial invasion in Iraq, all the tanks, the army units, the military units, the Marines, all those guys pushing into Iraq, uh, ignited that fire more and more into me to do something, to be a part of good, to be a part of change, to go fight for your country, to avenge all those people that died that day helplessly. I wanted to take whatever I had as a young man, enlist in some way, and go fight for my country, and go take the fight to those people so they would not have the energy, resources, or manpower to ever do something like that again to our nation.
I mean, looking back on it, going in the military, it was definitely after 9/11. I think, you know, every single day 9/11 was in our head. Um, we wanted to capture who was responsible for it, make them pay. And, on all the deployments, wherever they were. We were always on the hunt for them. We always wanted to get our vengeance, hopefully give some people some closure. But it was a motivating factor every single day.
Not as much as you might think, but more than I thought it would. Like, there are moments when, you're deployed or you come back, or you'll get in arguments about the war and should we be involved or not. And that was just a really easy, let me pull this out of my quiver. This is why. No matter what you have to say, no matter where you're from, wherever side of the aisle you're on, this is why you're going. This is why we're there. And to me, it was such an easy justification. Like, that's why.
I think every day of my service, because it was the main deciding factor for me to join the military, every day of my service reminded me of September 11th, all the people we lost that day. I mean, that's all I could think about was those images that came across the TV, seeing all those firefighters sift through that rubble, just hearing about the people that were lost. I mean, they had all those cell phone recordings of loved ones calling from those planes. And September 12th was probably the most patriotic day in American history, where not one person hated each other for differences. Like, we were united as a globe, as a matter of fact. I think there's more support behind the United States and in the United States than any other day in history. And I carried that motivation and that drive with me my whole service.
I think the way I felt finding out UBL had been killed, definitely a sense of vengeance to find out that, you can't hide in this world. Not from the U.S., at least in my opinion. We're going to find you. We're going to kill you. And we're going to make things right. Definitely a sense of vindication and hopefully a sense of closure for some families. I think one of the big things that stuck out with me that day was to see literally Obama came on TV and everybody poured into the streets. Everybody. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter where you were from, who you associated with, everybody came together and really celebrated that win.
I felt super jealous. Happy at the exact same time, super proud at the exact same time, just knowing how many man hours and the thousands of people in the multiple careers that have fully invested into locating him to finally get it done. Yeah, I mean, you felt vindicated, but I felt like I was on the same path of trying to find him as everybody else was. So yeah, I mean, it was good we got him. Awesome. Really wish I would have been there. And then, was I personally impacted by 9/11? We all were. But my family wasn't lost right there in the towers, or one of the first responders, or one of the ones that crashed in Pennsylvania. I wasn't directly affected like that. And those families who were, I wish I could ask them, do you feel vindicated? But for me, I'm super appreciative of all the people that it took to make that thing actually possible. And I am so thankful he is dead.
I felt relief. I was excited. Definitely some personal connections with that, but I remember that day as well. Hearing that news, I know we've been hunting that guy for so long, just to kind of see that come full circle from what I joined, why I joined, and who I was hoping to get, to seeing him actually targeted and killed. No, it was a sense of accomplishment, kind of finally we got the guy we were looking for, the main mastermind behind all those people's deaths. And it's almost like a closure to all those people that died in those towers.
So I have been back to Ground Zero a few times, both while I was in the military and outside the military. The first time I went to Ground Zero, I want to say it was in 2008, before the memorial and everything had been built. And man, I cried like a baby. There was a firehouse right next to 9/11, and they had, as much of a memorial and kind of museum that they could have had at that time, and it was just an overwhelming amount of emotion to see all. They had firefighters' jackets that were cut in half, like, cops snub nose 38s, just like bent, and tons of steel that just was sheared like butter, and it was super overwhelming. Came back, um, I want to say around 2012 or so. I can't remember the exact dates, but they had the memorial, going going through the whole thing, just as emotional, and kind of walking through all of that. Like, it's very humbling, and haunting, but to remember everybody that went in there, everybody that kind of lost their lives, just that whole day. I know it doesn't cover, um, just the towers, but it's really good to see the memorial. Um, I've been back probably late 2020 or so, um, all the way up to the skyscraper, everywhere else. But it's something that I think, especially kind of at our age and probably older, we'll never forget, and how impactful it was on us and everybody else that were there.
I did go back to Ground Zero. I avoided it my entire time in the military until I retired. It was last year. We finally made the trip and went and saw the Ground Zero Museum, and toured all the firehouses and saw all that, and it was so humbling to see. Like, to actually be there and to look at the throwback photos. I mean, there were several families that had survived, and or people that were inside the buildings that were there on Ground Zero doing like museum tours and stuff like that, and they hear it out of their mouths. It was so emotional, man. Like, knowing that the entire time that I served, I never went because I don't know, like, to me it was almost like it was like making the pilgrimage, right? It's like it's motivated you for so long, and it really connected us all together. And I feel like if I make the trip and I'm not emotionally ready, then it won't mean as much to me. And I'm actually glad I went. I think if I would have went as a young 24-year-old guy in the military, I probably wouldn't have got as much out of it as I do now. And now that I'm on the other side, I am just a civilian. When I stare at it now, I really see the sacrifice, and I appreciate it so much more. And I thought they did a hell of a job, honoring everybody we lost.
I went there when they were just building the fountains where the towers used to stand. Definitely went there a few years later to see the finished product, the Freedom Tower that's there. Got to walk through where the towers did stand, the bases. They have an underground memorial where a lot of the structure from the buildings kind of still are. Seeing the fire trucks that were captured in the rubble, all the guys' uniforms, to include some guys that I served with that are on display at that memorial in that museum. It gives me that sense of feeling since that first time I saw it and saw the attacks on TV, like that drive and motivation, that fire. Unfortunately, I wish I could still participate in the military and still continue that hunt for terrorist organizations. Going back to Ground Zero after everything was cleaned up, seeing the pictures from the next day and the few days after with the President George Bush that was there, the flag being put up after they discovered it outside the rubble. All those pictures had all those missing posters of people that were still looking for loved ones. They have all those up at the memorial. It's very somber, but very motivating at say the least. Like, if you've never felt compassion for someone you don't know, or just so much sympathy and empathy for all the people that lost, all the families that lost loved ones. I mean, thousands and thousands of people woke up that morning and didn't expect to not come home that night. It gives me a sense of realism, sense of ground, grounding to reality of what the world is capable of on the evil side, and being a part of the military, knowing that the world is capable of being a part of great good as well.
So I've met both. I met both survivors of 9/11, and I would say people that were impacted by 9/11, where they lost their husbands, wives, grandmothers, grandfathers, kids, um, and talking with those people, um, and being in the service at the time and after, they're super appreciative that they got some closure um, on getting who was responsible for it. I say just the U.S. being responsible for it, getting that person that created that whole event. Um, but I, all of my experience with the people that lost somebody really was appreciative of getting the closure on it. Some of the survivors, yeah, some of the first responders, talking with them, again, super humbling. They had super close, I say, teammates, partners that they lost. There were a couple that had been trapped in the building that were able to get out, and definitely traumatizing. But they're heroes. So it was good to interact with all of those different people and just kind of hear their stories.
Yeah, over the last 20 years, I mean, you get to meet a lot of different people, and everybody. It's kind of like the Kevin Bacon meme. Like, everybody's two ways separated. And yeah, I mean, when you're at Ground Zero, you go to the firehouse. I mean, there were guys that were there that day that are still serving, and like, it's so humbling to see it. That they've got to see New York City and the country at its finest, at its absolute worst, under complete destruction and chaos, and then rebuild back up to what it is now. Yeah, I mean, you get to run into a bunch of different people, and every single time you try to put yourself in their shoes, and depending on where they were on that day, it's like, oh, that's a hard thing to pull back from, man. It's got a lot of resiliency for those people. And yeah, it's always great to see.
So throughout my military career, being a part of the special missions unit that I was with, we had a lot of 9/11 survivors and 9/11 families that interacted with us quite frequently. I always took it as a very humbling experience. Each one of their stories impacted me quite a bit. Just being in the military, even though I wasn't directly related to anything with UBL, everybody always has a sense of thanks and gratitude for anybody that joined the military after 9/11, because that's why I did it. I did it for those folks, the survivors, the families, everybody else that had to live through that experience right there at Ground Zero and directly related to it. It's very humbling. It's very appreciative. It definitely, all the injuries that I sustained overseas, all the sacrifices that I made with time away from family, time away from my kids, pales in comparison on the sacrifices those folks made that day, unwillingly. So.
When I think about 9/11, there's a huge, like, overwhelming amount of emotion. Um, Going back to like when I was a 17-year-old kid sitting in history class, seeing and experiencing that whole thing happen. Um, Kind of going through all the deployments to be able to get who was responsible for that day. Um, Thinking about the families and you know how they mourn and their loss, the innocence that was taken away from them, the impact on the U.S. Like however, as a young American felt, what, getting older and looking back on it, just how that feels to me, and I can only imagine now that I'm 40, going through that kind of trauma and how it would feel different, or more emotion and kind of loss on that side, because being at 17, it's a little difficult to fully understand what's going on. But there's still probably not a day that goes by I don't think about it. But I'm happy that we got who was responsible for it, and to have that interaction with those people that lost people, the first responders, and to see they'll never be forgotten.
I think about FDNY every time, which is kind of weird. Not I mean, obviously the planes hitting, the 3,000 people we lost, but I really think of the photos of all the firemen is the first thing that comes to my mind, and that's typically what it is. And when I went there, every time I saw a fireman, and police and everything too, but just for me especially, like, I don't know if that's just what was flashing on the screens on the news more than anything else, or the FDNY patches everybody would carry overseas. Just to me, that was kind of it. So, yeah, every time I think about it, I think about a fireman standing on the back of that truck, hanging up the American flag. Like, that's what I think of. And man, that's why I love firemen so much. I don't know, I've never really thought about it. Like, typically when I think about 9/11, you think about the event as a whole, like not a singular thing. And when I think about a singular thing that represents it, I always think of a fireman. Knowing what you're running into, everybody else is pouring out of the front of it. And I think because all of those guys are so experienced, at a certain point, it's kind of a one-way mission. And I think we'd be foolish to think they didn't know that. Going up the stairs and the fact they went in anyway is that's probably about the most patriotic shit you could ever do. So I think when I think about a fireman, that's really what I think about. I think about going on the one-way mission because you said you would.
The biggest image that comes in my head when I think about 9/11 is just the effect it had on everybody in the realm, in that circle, in that city of when those planes hit. The amount of fear that must have been a part of that, confusion, panic. It's probably one of the most scariest situations ever imagined, or ever not imagined. Because me, even at 20 years old at the time, 19, 20 years old, I would have never imagined a commercial airliner running into one of the tallest buildings in the world as a terrorist attack. Yeah, I mean, it's just a cowardly move to attack unarmed civilians on a work day, stuck in a high tower just to make a statement. I mean, after that, it was just there's no room in humanity for people that think that's okay.
I remember that day like it was yesterday. Pass on the story of that day. Although it's with a lot of trauma and loss, but the heroism that a lot of people displayed. Don't take life for granted. You never know when it's going to be taken from you. And the evil out there every day isn't going away. It isn't. So remember what America is. Remember the freedoms you have and you enjoy. Never forget. Remember.
It's so hard now because there's so many people that weren't alive during the peak years post 9/11, and they don't realize the benefits it did to us as a country. And I know it's hard to look back and put yourself in the moment, but if you got to see the entire picture, like if you were my age or a little bit older in your 20s when 9/11 happened, there was a united bond between us and our allies that was unbreakable for the better part of a decade. Like, I felt like wherever you went, you were showered by people that actually loved and supported you, not because you were in the military, but because you were an American. And I don't want people to forget that. That love and that support is still all there. If you go to the UK, you go to Australia, you go to France, like all these countries, they still embrace us because they know the struggle we went through, because we've been there for them. And the stuff we tell the military guys now is every day is September 10th. Every day. Like, we are a stone's throw away from some some really, really terrible stuff happening to us. And the only reason we're not is because we have people actively combating it all day long. And the military presence has grown so much pre 9/11 to post 9/11, really in a decade span, and then it polished so much of the last 20 years. It can't be ignored that we turned something that was terrible and catastrophic and we absolutely polished a diamond out of the rubble. And I don't want that to be forgotten. I wish we didn't have to lose anybody. I wish those attacks wouldn't have killed a singular person. But taking all of that motivation, all of that rage, and directing it to our enemies was one of the greatest things we've ever done, because it showed everyone else on Earth how far we were willing to go. And we went the whole fucking way. I don't want that to ever be lost on how the conflicts ended or how they're being pursued now. I want you to think about how much that did to actually unite the nations and how much forward progress we got by just really being on the offensive the entire time. Like, we can't sit here and wait for somebody to punch us in the face. If they show they're willing to do it, we have to move forward. We have to be in that alert, ready posture. And that's a lot of the reasons why we're not getting these big terrorist attacks now. And I just really hope we kind of hold on to that. So I would tell you, every day, September 10th, every day, we are stone's throw away from some really terrible people doing some very terrible things to us. And the only reason they don't is because we have a very robust military and civilians inside of this nation that will actually defend it. So we owe each other, we owe ourselves to do that at a very professional level. So I use 9/11 as motivation for everyone who's serving now and everybody who's potentially going to serve, is that is what you're actively combating. So no one flies over here and does that shit again.
A lot of people like to say, never forget. Never forget is easier than always remembering. So always remember the impact that it had on the country, on the world. Remember what people were willing to do that day in the face of imminent danger and absolute destruction and absolute death. Think about those young policemen and those firefighters that ran into that building after the first one collapsed, knowing that it's probably be their last time going up those stairs, but they only thought about getting those people out and doing their duty as Americans and as fellow man. So the biggest thing I'd say is, let's not never forget. Let's always remember.